Carl Jung's final warning to empaths was deeply unsettling. "They're feeding on your light," he wrote, "and most of you don't even realize it's happening." In his private notes, Jung described a psychological phenomenon so disturbing that he hesitated to make it public. He found that empaths, those with extraordinary emotional sensitivity, were being systematically drained by what can only be described as unconscious energy parasites. These weren't overt predators. They often appeared as charming, wounded individuals who seemed to desperately need healing. But Jung uncovered something far darker. These people had, often without awareness, learned to survive by consuming the spiritual energy of others, especially empaths, whose inner light burned the brightest. The most terrifying aspect was that the feeding process was invisible. It took place through emotional manipulation disguised as connection, through trauma bonds mistaken for profound love, through the empath's own compassion being turned into a weapon against them. Jung realized that empaths didn't simply attract difficult people by chance. They were being hunted by those whose inner light had gone out, and who could only continue existing by feeding on the light of others. Join me as we descend into the shadowed depths of human psychology to uncover these unseen predators. Learn to recognize their feeding mechanisms before they strike, and discover Jung's forbidden method for transforming from prey into sovereign being, without losing the very gift that makes you exceptional. Because here's what Jung revealed, something modern psychology still struggles to accept: empaths aren't born broken. They're forged through childhood trauma, shaped into perfect hosts for emotional parasites. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Yet in his clinical work, he found something much darker. When an empath meets an energy parasite, only one person truly changes. And it's never the parasite. From an evolutionary point of view, this makes sense. Empaths develop their heightened perception as a means of survival. The child who could read every micro-expression, sense every mood swing, and absorb every unspoken emotion was the one who survived in a chaotic home. But here lies the tragic irony. The same mechanism that protected you as a child now makes you a beacon for adult predators who've learned to weaponize your gift. Dr. Judith Orloff's research supports Jung's findings. The mirror neurons of empaths fire more intensely than those of most people. Your brain literally experiences others' emotions as though they were your own. But what Jung realized, and what many therapists overlook, is that certain individuals have learned to exploit this neurological trait. They don't merely provoke your empathy by accident. They activate it with precision. They've unconsciously mastered the art of emotional manipulation that feels like connection, trauma bonding disguised as deep love, and energy extraction mistaken for intimacy. But that's not even the most devastating part. If you've ever felt completely drained after spending time with certain people and couldn't explain why, remember this: they were feeding on your light. Jung called this phenomenon the shadow projection reversal. The energy parasite doesn't just consume your light, they convince you that giving it away is your purpose. Jung observed this sinister pattern again and again throughout his clinical work. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Yet in the dynamic between empaths and energy parasites, this process becomes tragically inverted. The parasite projects their inner emptiness onto the empath, convincing them that exhaustion is normal, that depletion equals devotion, and that being drained is simply what love feels like. Think back to the last time you felt completely exhausted after spending time with someone. Your body likely tried to warn you. Sudden fatigue, emotional heaviness, tension in your body, or mental fog. But instead of trusting those signals, you probably dismissed them, telling yourself you were too sensitive or just overanalyzing things. That's exactly what the energy parasite needs you to believe. Jung referred to this as what can be seen as the gaslight of the unconscious, when another person's shadow manipulates your awareness so thoroughly that your intuition begins to feel like the problem. Here's how the feeding process actually unfolds, and this is where Jung's insights become frighteningly precise. Stage 1. The light recognition. Energy parasites are drawn to empaths like moths to a flame. They can sense emotional openness instantly, even from across a room. Jung noted that narcissistic personalities possess a striking ability to spot empaths almost immediately. They recognize that luminous presence, the person who gives more than they take, who feels deeply, and who instinctively shoulders others' emotions. Stage 2. The wound display. The parasite doesn't approach with demands. They approach with pain. They share their trauma stories, their heartbreaks, their emotional chaos. They mirror your depth while concealing their own emptiness. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Yet energy parasites have mastered the opposite. They become who you need them to be. Stage 3. The empathy activation. Once they've captured your compassion, they begin the extraction. They create constant emotional crises that demand your energy and attention. They unload their trauma again and again, never offering reciprocity. They make you feel uniquely special for understanding them when others supposedly couldn't. Jung observed that empaths often confuse being needed with being loved. Stage 4. The depletion normalization. This is the most insidious stage of all. The parasite convinces you that feeling drained is proof of your deep bond, that exhaustion means connection, that your emotional collapse is a sign of your heightened sensitivity rather than evidence of systematic depletion. But this is where Jung's understanding becomes revolutionary. He didn't view this merely as an interpersonal problem. He recognized it as an archetypal pattern, a timeless psychological dance between the wounded healer and the shadow devourer. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For empaths, this means facing a painful truth. Your compassion can be turned into a weapon, your gift can become a prison, and your light can be consumed if you fail to guard it. In Jungian psychology, every archetype carries its shadow. The empath's shadow isn't cruelty, it's the unconscious need to be needed. The compulsion to fix others because helping feels safer than being truly seen. The fear of abandonment so deep that you'd rather endure emotional vampirism than risk being alone. Energy parasites aren't evil masterminds plotting your destruction. They are unconscious beings driven by what Jung called the shadow's hunger for wholeness. They sense in you what they've lost in themselves. The ability to feel deeply, to connect authentically, to love with sincerity. But instead of reclaiming those parts through inner work, they unconsciously steal them from others. They feed on your emotions because they're cut off from their own. They bask in your light because they've extinguished their inner flame. This creates what I call the psychological vampire effect. The more energy you give them, the more they crave. The more you try to heal them, the more broken they become. The brighter your light, the darker their shadow grows. Not because they are evil, but because they are psychologically incomplete. They've severed themselves from their capacity for genuine emotion, so they must constantly extract it from others, like someone without a digestive system who must keep consuming but never feels full. And this leads to what I call the empath's impossible choice. You can feel their pain, their emptiness, their desperate hunger for the light you carry. Your compassionate nature urges you to help, to heal, to rescue them from their darkness. But Jung discovered a truth that changes everything. You cannot heal someone by letting them feed on your essence. You cannot love someone into wholeness by allowing them to drain your light. You cannot save a person who is unconsciously devoted to remaining lost. Let's look at how this pattern manifests in real life. The romantic energy vampire. Sarah met David at a spiritual retreat. He appeared deep, sensitive, wounded in a way that spoke directly to her healer's heart. He opened up about his childhood trauma, his depression, his search for meaning. Sarah felt chosen, special, like she was the only one who truly understood him. But within months, she began to notice the toll. She was constantly exhausted. David would call during her work hours with emotional emergencies, unloading his pain for hours without ever asking about her day. When she finally shared her own struggles, he either minimized them or turned the conversation back to himself. When Sarah applied Jung's insights, she realized David wasn't seeking healing. He was seeking supply. Her empathy had become his drug, her emotional labor, his crutch. And when she began setting boundaries, his mask slipped. He accused her of being cold, selfish, and not the person he thought she was. The truth was simple. Sarah had stopped being his source of emotional sustenance, and his unconscious immediately began searching for another host. The family energy parasite. Michael's mother had always been emotionally overwhelming. She would call him in crisis after crisis, making him feel responsible for her well-being. If he didn't answer right away, she guilt-tripped him for abandoning her. When he tried to set boundaries, she weaponized guilt and even threatened self-harm. Jung would have recognized this as the devouring mother archetype, the parent who unconsciously feeds on the child's life force instead of nurturing it. Michael's empathy had been used against him since childhood. When he discovered the concept of emotional parasitism, he finally understood. His exhaustion wasn't proof of being a bad son, but a symptom of being chronically drained by someone who never learned to manage her own emotions. Setting boundaries felt cruel, but in truth, it was an act of self-preservation. The workplace emotional vampire. Lisa worked with a colleague who was perpetually in crisis. This person hijacked meetings with personal drama, sought Lisa out for emotional support, and made their inability to cope everyone else's responsibility. What made it worse was how they framed their behavior, as sensitivity, depth, and vulnerability in a cold corporate world. Lisa's empathy made her feel obligated to help, to carry the emotional burden. Jung would have seen this as a classic projection. The colleague was unconsciously transferring their own emotional chaos onto others, forcing everyone around them to hold what they couldn't contain themselves. And here is where Jung's warning becomes critical. The longer you allow an energy parasite to feed on your light, the more your identity starts to merge with their shadow. You begin to accept their projection, that your purpose is to meet others' emotional needs. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For empaths, that means confronting a hard truth. Your drive to heal others often comes from your own unhealed pain. The shadow side of empathy is the unconscious belief that your worth depends on being useful, that love must be earned through service, that your value lies in absorbing and transmuting other people's suffering. This belief turns you into the perfect host for emotional parasites. You give endless energy while convincing yourself it's love. You exhaust yourself and call it compassion. You sacrifice your well-being and call it spiritual growth. But Jung discovered something that changes everything about how you see yourself. Your light was never meant to be consumed by others. It was meant to guide you toward your own wholeness. When you constantly give away your energy, you're not being selfless. You're avoiding the terrifying task of learning to love yourself. When you pour yourself into healing others, you're often escaping the deeper challenge of confronting your own wounds. In this way, the energy parasite becomes your accomplice in spiritual bypassing. They offer you someone to save, so you never have to save yourself. They create endless drama, so you never have to face your own shadows. They offer you the role of the martyr, so you never have to step into the role of the sovereign. But Jung provided a framework for breaking that cycle, for protecting your light without hardening your heart. I call it the light method. L. Learn to discern energy signatures. Jung emphasized the significance of what he called feeling tone complexes, the energetic and emotional imprints each person carries. Every individual radiates a unique energy signature that your empathic sensitivity can detect once you learn to pay attention. Energy parasites register differently in your system than healthy people. After interacting with them, you feel drained, anxious, foggy, or emotionally hijacked. After connecting with healthy individuals, you feel grounded, inspired, and alive. Start paying attention to these shifts. Note how you feel before, during, and after time with different people. Your body is a finely tuned radar, capable of identifying energy parasites if you trust its signals. I. Integrate your shadow. Jung believed that true psychological health requires integrating the shadow. For empaths, this means acknowledging the parts of yourself that crave being needed, that fear abandonment, that believe love must be earned through sacrifice. Ask yourself, what do I gain from being indispensable to broken people? How does rescuing others distract me from my own healing? Which childhood wounds am I still trying to mend through others? The goal isn't to eliminate these traits, but to bring them into consciousness, so they no longer unconsciously control your relationships. G. Guard your sacred energy. Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's a spiritual duty. It means saying no to emotional labor that drains you. It means refusing to carry others' unresolved pain. It means choosing relationships that nourish your soul rather than deplete it. Your energy is finite and sacred. Every moment spent processing someone else's shadow is a moment stolen from nurturing your own light. H. Honor your authentic nature. Energy parasites are drawn to empaths who dim their brilliance to make others comfortable. The more you suppress your gifts, deny your intuition, or downplay your sensitivity, the easier it is for others to feed on what you're hiding. Jung's concept of individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who others expect you to be, is essential here. For empaths, this means embracing your sensitivity as power, trusting your intuition as wisdom, and using your gifts consciously instead of unconsciously. Transform trauma into wisdom. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That includes accepting that you've been targeted by emotional parasites. Not because you're weak, but because you possess something luminous that unconscious people crave. Your empathic sensitivity may have formed as a survival mechanism, but now it must evolve into a conscious choice. You can feel others' emotions without absorbing them. You can offer compassion without sacrificing yourself. You can help others without draining your own life force. When you apply Jung's principles to your relationships, everything changes. You stop attracting energy parasites and start drawing in conscious, emotionally balanced individuals, those who can meet your depth without depleting your spirit. But Jung also offered a crucial warning about this transformation. As you begin withdrawing your energy, parasites often escalate their feeding behaviors. They may create new crises, threaten self-harm, or accuse you of being cold, selfish, or unkind. They'll attempt to guilt you back into the old dynamic by invoking their pain, their trauma, their need for your support. Jung referred to this as what can be seen as the extinction burst of the shadow. When the parasite senses its source of nourishment fading, it becomes more desperate and manipulative. This escalation is not proof that you're being cruel, it's evidence that your boundaries are working. Stay strong during this phase. Remember, their chaos reflects their addiction to your energy, not your failure as a person. You are not responsible for regulating their emotions once they can no longer use you as their emotional landfill. Healthy people will honor your limits and celebrate your growth. They'll understand when you need space, encourage your healing journey, and reciprocate the emotional energy you give. And yet, Jung revealed one final truth, the most important of all. You must become the kind of person you wish to attract. If you desire conscious relationships, you must first become conscious yourself. If you seek reciprocity, you must learn not only to give but also to receive. And if you long for authentic love, you must dare to show up authentically, not as the version of yourself others expect you to be. Jung understood that the battle for your light is ultimately spiritual. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Yet energy parasites have a vested interest in keeping you small, exhausted, and unaware of your own strength. When you begin protecting your energy and enforcing boundaries, you're not merely changing how you relate to others, you're entering what I call the war for your soul. And this war is not symbolic. Your very essence, your light, your life force, are at stake. Energy parasites will deploy every psychological weapon to retain access to your energy. Guilt. After everything I've told you, you're just going to abandon me? Shame. I thought you were more compassionate than this. Fear. You're selfish, you'll end up alone. False urgency. I need you right now more than ever. Identity attacks. This isn't who you really are. But Jung revealed the ultimate defense against these tactics. Consciousness. The moment you see manipulation for what it is, it loses its hold over you. Every time you say no to emotional vampirism, you're saying yes to your own evolution. Every boundary you establish is a vote for your authentic self. Every refusal to dim your light for someone else's comfort is a choice for spiritual growth over spiritual stagnation. This doesn't mean you must become cold or unfeeling. It means you must become discerning. You begin to recognize the line between genuine compassion and codependent caretaking. You learn to help others without harming yourself. And here lies the truth Jung uncovered, one that transforms everything. When an empath awakens to their true power, they become a threat to systems built on unconsciousness. An empath who can no longer be manipulated, drained, or controlled destabilizes every dynamic based on inequality. You become a living mirror that reflects others' unconsciousness back to them. You become a boundary that forces people to confront their own emotional immaturity. The awakened empath doesn't merely protect their light, they become a beacon that inspires others to ignite their own. You stop being a resource to be consumed and evolve into a catalyst for others' transformation. But this evolution demands courage, the kind that most empaths find terrifying. You must be willing to be disliked by unconscious people. You must accept the loss of relationships that depended on your self-sacrifice. You must choose solitude over false connection. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Once you awaken, you can only maintain relationships with those committed to their own growth. Everyone else will drift away. But that isn't failure, it's discernment. It isn't loss, it's liberation. It isn't loneliness, it's sovereignty. If you've ever been called selfish for setting boundaries with emotional vampires, remember this truth. My energy is sacred. You'll come to value one authentic bond over a dozen draining relationships. You'll realize that presence matters more than company, that depth matters more than quantity. And you'll understand that your light is far too sacred to be consumed by those who refuse to face their own shadows. Jung identified 3 levels of empathic development, and knowing where you stand among them will guide you toward true energetic sovereignty. Level 1. The unconscious empath. At this stage, you feel everything yet understand nothing. You absorb other people's emotions without realizing it, and as a result, you're constantly exhausted, often blaming yourself for being too sensitive. You attract energy parasites because you haven't yet learned to protect your gifts. At this level, your empathy controls you rather than the other way around. You're like a radio picking up every signal but unable to tune to a single clear station. The path forward begins with developing emotional boundaries and learning to separate what you feel from what belongs to others. Only then can your empathy start working for you instead of against you. Level 2. The conscious empath. Here, you begin to awaken. You recognize your empathic nature and start using it with awareness. You can feel others' emotions, but you no longer automatically absorb them. You've learned basic energy protection techniques and can maintain some boundaries with emotional parasites. You're beginning to discern the difference between empathy and codependency. At this stage, you can extend compassion without depleting yourself, but guilt still lingers when you set boundaries. You sometimes slide back into old patterns, mistaking self-preservation for selfishness. Still, you're evolving. Your empathy is no longer a weakness. It's becoming a conscious skill. Level 3. The sovereign empath. At this level, you've integrated your shadow and embraced your empathic gifts as spiritual strengths rather than emotional burdens. You can feel deeply without losing yourself. You now attract conscious, reciprocal connections that honor your emotional investment. Your empathy has transformed into a tool for discernment rather than a trap for manipulation. You can sense the difference between authentic emotion and emotional performance. You can hold a healing presence without taking on another person's wounds as your own. The journey from level 1 to level 3 demands what I call the courage to disappoint. You must be willing to disappoint energy parasites who expect unlimited access to your light. You must be willing to disappoint family members who've relied on you to regulate their emotions. You must be willing to disappoint society's expectation that empaths should always be available for others' healing. But with this transformation comes Jung's final warning. Once you begin protecting your light, you can never return to unconscious empathy. Once you see the feeding patterns, you cannot unsee them. Once you experience energetic sovereignty, you can never go back to emotional servitude. This awakening will cost you relationships. It will challenge your identity. It will force you to confront the parts of yourself that would rather be needed than respected, useful than authentic, depleted than alone. And some of you will make a critical mistake. You'll mistake walls for boundaries. You'll become cynical about human connection rather than discerning about energetic exchange. You'll confuse emotional detachment with spiritual maturity. Don't fall into that trap. The goal isn't to stop feeling or caring. It's to feel and care consciously, with intention and wisdom instead of compulsion and unconsciousness. Jung's final reminder remains the same. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to become who you truly are, you must release who you believe you must be to keep others comfortable. Your light is not a resource to be consumed. It's a sacred presence to be embodied. Your empathy is not a service to be endlessly provided. It's a divine gift to be shared consciously. Because the world doesn't need more depleted healers. It needs awakened ones. It needs awakened empaths, those who understand the difference between love and enabling, compassion and codependency, service and self-sacrifice. If people began treating you differently once you stopped being their emotional dumping ground, comment. They sensed my awakening before I announced it. Remember Jung's haunting discovery about empaths being fed upon? The energy parasites he described weren't monsters. They were unconscious beings who learned to survive by consuming the light of others instead of kindling their own. In his final notes, Jung wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. You can't fix or heal energy parasites. You can only outgrow your need to be needed by them. And that realization changes everything. When you protect your light, you don't diminish it, you amplify it. When you stop allowing others to feed on your energy, you gain more energy for your own growth, healing, and evolution. The empath who learns to guard their gifts doesn't become less compassionate, they become more discerning. They learn to offer their light only to those who can receive it without depleting it, appreciate it without consuming it, and match it without dimming it. Jung's final warning was never just about shielding yourself from energy parasites. It was about claiming your birthright as a conscious being. One who chooses how to use their gifts, instead of being unconsciously compelled to give them away. Your sensitivity is not a curse to be managed. It's a superpower to be mastered. Your empathy is not a weakness to hide. It's a strength to be wielded consciously. Your light is not fuel for others' darkness. It's illumination for your own path toward wholeness. The energy parasites Jung warned about can only feed on unconscious empaths. But when you awaken to your true nature, when you learn to protect your essence while still sharing your gifts, when you become sovereign over your own energy field, you become immune to their feeding mechanisms. That's the ultimate protection. Not walls that shut everyone out, but consciousness that lets only love in. Master this distinction, and you'll never again confuse being drained with being loved, being needed with being valued, or being depleted with being devoted. Jung's warning was clear. They're feeding on your light. But his promise was even clearer. You have the power to stop them. If you recognize yourself in this message, know this, you're not alone. Thousands of empaths are awakening, reclaiming their power, and stepping into sovereignty. Share in the comments. What's one boundary you're ready to set to protect your light? Your story might be exactly what another empath needs to begin their own awakening. And if you're ready to go deeper into Jung's psychology and how it shapes modern relationships, watch my next video. Why you have no motivation left after facing your shadow, Carl Jung's Psychology. In it, I reveal what happens to your drive and ambition when you begin the process of shadow integration. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.